What's up, guys? This is xBenJamminx from DailyRotosharks.com, and we are here with Scott Hanson, the recent $2 million DraftKings FanDuel fantasy football champion. Scott, you can follow him at RG_escot4 on Twitter. And Scott, thanks for joining us, man. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks for having me.
Of course, bro. And we obviously met at the DraftKings championship, and it was my first event, and I had one of the best times of my life there with my partner CG, and it was a pleasure meeting you, man. And we're just going to talk a little bit about your past, how you got into DFS, how you qualified for the tournament, and some of your research processes and lineup construction and stuff like that.
All right, sounds good.
All right, brother. So I'm just starting up the Periscope right now. Okay, we have the Periscope going, we have the YouTube going, and here we go. All right, so to start off, one of the things that I always like to ask people is, what did you do for schooling wise before you ended up? What did you do for school before you ended up switching over to whatever career you graduated from? So where did you go, and what did you study for school?
Sure. I went to UC Riverside, and actually something that's kind of interesting about it, I didn't know him while I was there, but E. Hafner went to the same school. He's another major DFS player. He was there after I was, so I don't think we had any overlap time or anything like that. But him, and then also Oreo, who's another kind of major DFS player. So we got a nice little strong triad of players from UCR. Hopefully we can rival the Colorado State group a little bit, although they got a pretty crazy group.
That's awesome, man. So yeah, the three of you all from the same spot.
Yeah. Then at UCR, I actually was a liberal studies major, and my major concentration was in ethnic studies, so probably not what you would have expected or anything, but
not like a PhD in mathematics analytics.
Right. I mean, it was just, the major that I decided didn't have any math. I am like kind of a math guy. Like I always was good at math. All that I needed to take was like one calculus class in college, and interestingly enough, that is the only class I've ever failed.
Wow.
But I mean, I retook it and got a B+. It was, I'm going to say this, my professor the first time did not really speak English as a first language, and I had a really difficult time understanding anything, and it was kind of weird, but yeah, it was also it was like the first quarter of my freshman year also. It was like college was new and everything, and so I was probably the least focused on academics that I've ever been. And when I retook it the next quarter, I did fine. So, but yeah, I mean, I consider myself a math guy in general. Like that's really heavy in my process and stuff. I guess once math stopped using numbers and started using imaginary numbers, I just kind of became disinterested.
Right, man. I always used to say that. Like once we started putting the alphabet into math, we're going off in different directions here.
Yeah, it was a little different. I like working with numbers, not imaginary numbers. But anyway, yeah, I was a liberal studies major. I did that so that I could teach elementary school of all things. I kind of wanted to teach and coach basketball and football both. I eventually still plan to do that as far as coaching. Probably not as far as teaching anymore. I did teach 1st and 4th grade for about a year each. I actually started my first year like during the school year, so it was kind of a weird situation. But to be honest, I kind of didn't end up liking teaching. It sounds bad because I know it's like an awesome career. It makes a really big impact and stuff, but I guess it just wasn't really my calling. It wasn't what I was best suited for. I kind of felt out of place when I was teaching. And from there, I ended up going into personal training, and I did that for, I believe, around 5 years. Maybe actually, it might even be more than that. So I did that. That was going well. You know, I really enjoyed it. It was kind of cool having like a different schedule than just like a typical 9 to 5, and being able to be kind of in control of some of the schedule. I probably did things somewhat unconventionally with training too, because I was really heavy with like how I would do people's programs. Like I would use Excel to do them. I would do a ton of planning. It was just like the way I did things, you know, and I would track everyone's numbers, like so many things, like so many statistics essentially, because that's like always what I've been into. And it worked really well, you know, when you track stuff really accurately, then, you know, people make good progress and they're able to see like cause and effect. Like when I do this, this is what happens. When I get better at this, this is how I'm able to improve. So, you know, it was cool. It was going well. I liked it all the way up until I stopped. It was just at a certain point I got into DFS, and that was kind of when things started changing for me.
That's
So I
pretty
started
interesting.
DFS.
So you can you can actually get into DFS through personal training. Yeah, this is a first. I haven't heard of that before.
Well, it wasn't because of personal training by any means. That was totally unrelated. It was,
I know.
you know, I was always into fantasy football. I've been into sports since I was a kid, and like as a kid, my parents would give me like the book of stats from the previous year, or actually they wouldn't give it to me. If I went to like a bookstore, that's what I wanted. You know, I just wanted to like read the stats. And if we went on a car ride of like 2.5 hours, I'd be good the entire time. I'd be doing nothing but focusing on that. And, you know, they would like barely know I was there. Like I loved it. I could focus on that forever. You know,
So
I
was that
memorized.
like the regular stats of like completions and yards and things like that, or were you trying to dig into like advanced statistics?
Well, I don't know if they really had to advance stats back then anyway, because yeah, I mean, I'm 35 now, so back then it was like you get these fantasy football books, and you know, some of them use like the most basic scoring system, like 6 points for a touchdown, and that's it. You know, no yards even. So, you know, when I first got into it, it was kind of to that point, and then it started getting a little more in depth from there. But you know, it would be like a book of stats from the previous NBA season, and I would like memorize players' averages and stuff, and just things like that. I always used to enjoy that. So, you know, I got into fantasy sports that way, and I always was participating in those. I always did well. I'd kind of like pretty much make the playoffs like 95% of the leagues I was in, whether it's football or basketball. And so, you know, it was just always something that I enjoyed and was good at. And during the 2014 NFL season, kind of started seeing ads for FanDuel. And, you know, I didn't really think too much of it because I already spent so much time on my regular season long teams. But one of those weekends, I was just sitting watching football like normal, and my wife was next to me, and one of the commercials came on, and she suggested that I try it, you know? And I'm thinking like, okay, I don't know if she wants me spending more time on fantasy sports,
Right.
but she suggested it, so you know.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, she got you to where you are. You know, you couldn't have done it without her.
Yeah, I mean, I look at it that way in a lot of ways too, because just the way that things happened was so perfect that I almost feel like if I had started any other week or any other time, it could have just altered the way that things went, and who knows how it would have gone. But as it was, my third week of playing, I only had a single $5 entry in play, and that won first place in a tournament of like 57,000 people, and I won $15,000 just my third week of playing, and it was off of a single entry. So like that was huge. You know, we instantly took like 12K off the site and used that for like student loans and stuff that we were still paying back.
Dude, that's awesome.
And then
I have the same exact story as that.
really,
That's crazy. Yeah, I've never heard anyone else like with the same similar story. Like, because I tell people I literally in my second week of playing I won $7,000 in a tournament. And
wow.
I was like, I didn't know anything about like bankroll managers. So I took all $7,000 out and paid off all my student loans and credit card debts. Like, and then I just literally started fresh again. Like, I didn't have any concept of like managing a bankroll. It was just like I just put it towards student loans and started over. And like that's awesome to hear that you actually did the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see that as a bad thing at all. Like usually if you're talking poor bankroll management, it's about not taking any money off the site and then just losing it back.
Well, if anything, I just had none.
Yeah, I mean, if you got student loans, like that's always a good thing to pay off. Like to do over again, I would have done the exact same thing. So
Awesome.
yeah, I mean, it's definitely good use of the money for sure.
So now you have $3,000 in your account. Where do you go from there?
From there, I mean, I just started making a few more lineups, and I just kind of started making a process of analysis. You know, I kind of figure out which players were at least in consideration for me. I started using Excel and building some spreadsheets, and just as I went along, they got more and more complex, and you know, I took more and more things into account. So, you know, my next few weeks, there wasn't anything too major, but I still wasn't putting in a whole lot of money or anything like that. It was like less than 100 a week, I think, and you know, eventually I got up to where I put in around 300 in a week, and I think that was the week that I ended up qualifying for the FanDuel Live Final. I had like 30 entries into the $2 qualifier, and I think like 3 of them were in the top 200 out of almost 60,000. So you know, they were doing pretty well, and one of them hit. So ended up qualifying for that just like a month after the first big win, and then basically that final was another month or so later. And once that happened, I ended up winning that. So it was like just an amazing string, like just to start out that whole experience, I guess.
It's a crazy run right off the bat to start.
Yeah. So, you know, that happened. And then, you know, shortly after, I didn't have any plans of, you know, quitting my job at that point, because it was like, okay, it's one day, you know, of course it's a huge amount and everything, but it doesn't mean it's repeatable yet. I know I was on an awesome run, and I did think that I was really good too. You know, I didn't think it was completely fluky, because, you know, 2 of the wins were in really huge fields, and you know, in both of those, I found out I would have done really well in like the higher buy-in contest that I wasn't in. So, so you know, I knew that I had a talent for it. And oh, another thing I forgot to mention too is before we had moved to Pasadena and I was continuing personal training, I also did a year of analysis with Pro Football Focus, and that was huge for me. Actually, that was probably one of the biggest things that I think helped me out, was the type of analysis that they did, being able to watch a game and look for certain things, just really looking closely at what's happening, and being able to see certain things that maybe other people aren't looking for in a game that could lead to predicting future outcomes. So that was something that I think was really
great time for a transition into that, in terms of like researching and process and things like that. Like how does what you learned at Pro Football Focus help you in analyzing players and statistics and in the relevancy in building lineups?
Yeah, well, one of the big things that I like about their site is that they grade the players, and they grade them in different categories too. So, you know, I don't want to just look at a player's overall grade, because a lot of it could be because of blocking, you know, and that could either increase or decrease their overall grade significantly. And that doesn't really help you as a DFS player. You know, if you're choosing Martellus Bennett because he's got a really good grade, and then you find out, okay, a lot of it is because of his run blocking, then, well, that's not going to help. So, so yeah, finding the context, like finding what's relevant within the player's grades. And, you know, sometimes you'll see a player whose grade has been increasing gradually over the last few weeks, and it's because maybe it's just like he's the healthiest he's been all season. You know, maybe it's because they lost somebody and now he's got a bigger role and he's getting targeted more, and he's been good in limited opportunities before. But like, you want to do everything you can to find context as to like why players are performing a certain way. And I think that that's one of the best sites to go for, that gives you that context outside of just the traditional stats.
So you would say
So
there's more to analyzing for DFS than just looking at numbers. You still have to have some objective relevancy in terms of the context.
right, and they do a good job of quantifying that into numbers still. So you still get a number for that, although it doesn't specifically apply to a stat, and I don't like plug it into anything like that. It's just kind of like I want to see how a player's been doing, and when I watch the games, that's kind of what I'm looking for too, is like, how is the player looking? It's not always about the numbers he racks up in the previous game. Like if I see a player rush for like 75 yards and no touchdowns, and basically he's like a bust that week because he gets like 7.5 fantasy points during those carries, if he just didn't get good blocking and he really looked explosive, then I'm going to still want to use him that next week, and other people might be off of him. And I think those are some of the best opportunities to be on someone that's going to be low owned, because really, especially over the last few years, the whole DFS landscape has changed quite a bit. It used to be in my first year of playing, you could kind of pick the best players and they're just going to be low owned anyway, because not many people were doing enough research, so like you could get good players at low ownership by default. Now you have to like really dig for those low owned players that have a chance at doing well, because usually the players who are going to do well are going to be somewhat heavily owned because everybody knows it and everyone else is following closely now too. So you got to find some way to be different.
So would you consider yourself a contrarian player in general? Like, do you find that a lot of your lineups end up being contrarian, or do you just make the good lineups that you can, and just because of the research you've done, certain players end up doing well with low ownership? Like, do you see a difference there?
In a sense, I mean, I guess I consider it contrarian either way. If you're going for a player that's low owned because you really like that player that week, and your process just led you to a good projection for them, then it's still being contrarian just because it's low owned. But then there's also the ones that are kind of like boom or bust plays. They kind of need to catch a long touchdown or something, like my Travis Benjamin pick that didn't work out so well a couple weeks ago. Then of course he catches a long touchdown last week.
I know, man. I was honestly thinking of that when it happened, and to bring it up,
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys know this, but Scott's last tweet on Twitter was asking the question, how is Travis Benjamin looking at practice these days? Does he seem to have his speed back yet? And then when looking at the lineup that he had, and I think this is a good time to transition into looking at the lineup in general. We got right here. Right, so this is the lineup. We got Luck, Le'Veon, LaShawn, Travis Benjamin, Gabriel, Hilton, Doyle, Coleman, and Falcons. And this is the first time I've seen someone win a tournament with a negative in their lineup. How crazy is that? It ended up with minus 0.2 at 1% owned, and you still took it down.
So, yeah, it was interesting. I mean, it's funny because I was on Travis Benjamin all week, and I had 3 entries into the final, and he was in 2 of my 3 lineups, actually. I knew that he would be really low owned. I was thinking I would be the only person who had him. Apparently, one other person took him. I didn't see who it was, but I liked him. The previous week, he had dropped what would have been a 79-yard touchdown, and it looked like he had a speed, so he got behind the defense. It was a pretty good pass. He just didn't take it in. And if he catches that, which I'm thinking he's probably going to do 8 out of 10 times, then that week he ends up with over 100 yards and a touchdown. His price goes up and everyone's on him the next week, So I just think of it as like that's an opportunity to capitalize off of him not catching that pass and get a guy at really low ownership who could have, one big play and pretty much hit value because he costs so little.
So do you watch the games live, or do you go back to like the NFL like Game Pass or something and go like rewatch them?
Yeah, I mean, even though I spend a ton of time on this and do it full time, I don't watch every game or anything like that. Like I watch Red Zone, so that way you see all the big plays at least, and then I'll watch the nationally televised games and then I might go back. Like I have Game Pass, or Game Rewind. So I'll go back occasionally if there's a player that I want to see. And I did do that for Travis Benjamin. I went and looked at his 4 targets that he had the previous week, and just to see how he looked on those. And, it looked like he was running well and everything. And I kind of thought maybe the targets would swing back in his direction again, since, he was getting targeted more heavily early in the season and he was starting to get healthier.
Yeah, just
I
a
was
week too
wrong.
early. Week too early.
The thing about it is, if you're a tournament player like me, I'm only tournaments. I don't do any cash games at all.
No cash at all. Okay, that was a question
No.
I was going to ask.
Yeah, so no cash games at all for me. You don't need to be right about everything. It's just when you are right, if you're really right on like a certain pick that nobody else is on, that's your upside there. That's like when you can win a big tournament because nobody else is on that same pick. And sometimes we figure out ways to go off the board and we have like a good rationalization behind it and it doesn't hit, and most people will be like, yeah, of course it didn't hit. Like Travis Benjamin was a crappy play that week.
Yeah.
But, if you have a good reason for using them, then, if it doesn't hit, it's like, that could easily happen. I knew that there was easily like a lot of bust potential with Benjamin, but if you're going to have someone bust, better to have someone who's 4K bust than like your main picks, So I went a bit safer with my higher cost picks like Le'Veon Bell and LaShawn McCoy. Those are guys who are pretty unlikely to bust in the spots they were in. So you can go a little more off the board with the low cost picks, especially like my other one was Travis, I was the only one in the tournament who had him. He was a really cheap tight end. Tons of tight ends busted that week.
Doyle?
And, he had like 10.5, but that's like almost 4x for his price because he was so cheap. So that was not like a great game by any means, but for tight end for that week, it was actually a good game.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the only other tight end who I think did well was Tyler Eifert, and he was only 1% owned in the tournament.
Yeah, like Eifert, and then Zach Ertz, he was one other one. I think he put up like 24 fantasy points that week, but then so many others busted, and like a ton of people had single digits from their tight ends, and at a lot higher cost than what I used. So like that was one of the ways to be able to catch up a little bit. And of course that week a ton of quarterbacks busted too. That was terrible.
Crazy. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you went with the double stack with Luck, TY, and Doyle.
Yeah, and originally I wasn't even planning to double stack it. It was just that Doyle was the tight end that I liked most for really cheap, and so he was kind of the one that allowed me to fit the other players that I wanted. He was probably like my last player in, and I know sometimes a double stack is kind of risky because even if one of the players hits, it's common that the other one doesn't. But so it's not like a strategy I would typically use in a really small field like this. It's better in a large field usually. But when the second guy is really cheap, then it's a lot less risky than if you're double stacking like Brandon Cooks and Michael Thomas, which is riskier just because of their cost, but it's also really high upside, as you can see from last week.
Yeah, it's crazy. So that I like the differentiator is the lower cost guy is the one that you usually will play around with more and be a little bit safer on the higher end guy.
Yeah.
But transitioning to a multi-part question for you in terms of game selection and lineup building. So what do you look at for like entry fees? Do you prefer to max enter lower dollar or put a few lineups in the higher dollar? Do you look at the size of the entries, like the amount of people, and do you make your lineups by hand or using like an optimizer?
Yeah, well, to start, as far as the game selection, for me that changed a lot this season. I started the season, like my plan was kind of to do around 20 to 30 lineups on both FanDuel and DraftKings, and that was what I did week 1. Then week 2, I saw Al Smizzle win the Millionaire Maker with, you know, the max entries, and I'm thinking like, okay, I'm gonna play around the same amount at least that it takes to max enter. You know, now that the entry limit is so much less, I can max enter these contests at the, you know, medium range buy-ins and max enter like a low dollar qualifier, and that'd be pretty much it. And I'm still not putting in anything too crazy. So I started max entering after week 2 in the Millionaire Maker, and I also, because I did that, started playing almost all on DraftKings. I think my overall volume has probably been about 95% DraftKings and 5% FanDuel this year. So I was fortunate to qualify for the FanDuel one. I really only went for it heavily like the last week you could qualify, and that was when I qualified for it.
Oh, that's awesome, man. How come primarily DraftKings? Just because of the games themselves?
I liked the structure more. FanDuel seems like it's been gradually decreasing the prize pools the whole time, and I also like the roster construction at DraftKings more because I don't like the kicker. You know, I'm not a big fan of that. I like the extra flex. I also like that it's full PPR, and even the yardage bonuses, they just make it less touchdown dependent. I really think there's a little bit more skill involved with making picks there because it's more projectable. Like yards are easier to project accurately than touchdowns. So
and catches.
So yeah, I felt like yeah, exactly. So that's kind of the reason. And then also for the season, I started doing this full-on study. Every single week, I would take down like all the players who are on my radar, what percent owned they were, what they ended up hitting as far as points, whether they were a bust, whether they hit what I consider tournament value, whether they crushed value and were like the tournament winning type players. And I organized that into a bunch of different categories and used that analysis throughout the season to kind of figure out like which players at which costs are better in terms of like taking advantage of the pricing and taking advantage of like game theory in the tournaments, like who you could get low ownership. And so I've been doing a whole lot of analysis from that each week. I probably put in a good amount of hours just on, yeah, just through Excel. And I just kind of like made it from scratch, and it's something that, you know, nobody else has. So I'm like, all right, this is an advantage here. It's like just a different way of organizing things. Like anyone could go back and do the same, and you know, that would be totally cool, but you know, it's going to take you a good amount of hours to do it. It could easily be worth it though.
Awesome.
So
And
that's
then
something
what about
that
lineup building? Do you do it by hand, optimizer, projections?
So, well, I do my own projections from scratch to start, and I could, if you want, after I answer this, I could go through like my process for that too. But it's a little bit long. And then
no, that's fine, man. I'll give you
I do all my lineups by hand. I never use any kind of like optimizer or anything because I'm kind of big on correlations in tournament lineups. And you know, sometimes I'll have a tendency to over correlate in lineups, and if it's a week where there's no blowouts or major shootouts, then that could get me in trouble if I do it too much. So I try to scale that back a little bit and make sure that I have enough correlations, but also enough lineups where there's not too much in terms of correlations. And what it also allows me to do, since I project ownership percentage each week, is make sure that I get at least a few guys in every lineup that are going to be low owned. To me, that makes it so every lineup is at least live. You know, if you have too much chalk in every lineup in a really huge field tournament like the Millionaire Maker, you really have pretty much zero chance of winning the tournament outright. And since it's such a top-heavy contest, you want to have that shot at winning the top prize, and so you can't build stuff like a cash game lineup if you want to have a chance at winning. So, I mean, you don't have to go crazy off the board, but you do have to have some low-owned players, whether they're guys who are risky or not. Just they should at least be low-owned so you have a chance to pass all the people when certain players that are chalky bust.
So you like using like one or two low-owned guys per lineup? You always try to like, do you have a range of players that you like to use, or you just
like
how every lineup? Yeah, like. when you're making?
Yeah, I have somewhat of a system. Like I try to get two guys in the lineup that I'm projecting at 5% or less, and at least one other that's 10% or less. And then the rest of my guys are just my favorite players, which means they could easily also be low owned. So I could have a lineup that's really contrarian, but they could be really chalky. So it's just like I kind of have a baseline minimum of like at least these three guys are going to be pretty low owned, and when I do that, then I feel like it makes each lineup at least contrarian enough, even if I've got like four guys that are 30+% besides them.
Oh, okay. That definitely makes sense. And something I like to do too is I tell people about one of my NBA strategies is that you don't have to have an entirely contrarian play. You don't have to go for just low owned players. But if you make your lineups in different ways than other people are making them, your entire construction can be contrarian, which will put you on different plays in general. Like if everybody's paying up for running backs that week and you pay down, you're going to have a different set of wide receivers to work with than they may have by paying up at running back. So different ways like that.
Yeah, I definitely try to vary that too. Like that's a very good point. Like that would have worked really well this past week too, because Le'Veon Bell didn't have a big game, and like David Johnson was solid, but for his DK price, he could have done better with guys like Devontae Freeman and LaShawn McCoy. So, if you went with the fate of both David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell, which was already making your lineup contrarian just because most lineups had at least one of those guys in it, then that's another way. You don't need to go really low ownership outside of those guys if you just fade some of the very top chalky players. So yeah, that's a very good point. That is another way to do it. And also some of my contrarian plays that it's not like I'll go contrarian always at running back or wide receiver. You're kind of going to go contrarian by default with most quarterbacks, just because there's usually only a couple of them that are even over 10% owned each week. So you don't have to think too much to go contrarian at quarterback. You could just pick your favorite one, and oftentimes he's under 10% owned anyway. Same thing with defense.
What's your process in terms of going through and like building projections and analyzing like the players, like ceilings or floors?
Right. All right. So I'll see if I can do this without taking too long, but it's a long process.
No, it's all right, man. You got the floor.
All right. So I start off by just making a spreadsheet that includes all of the matchups with all the players and everything, just so that I have it all on the page. Then from there, I go with analyzing like the total of each game and trying to project what the final score will be. And I start with the Vegas totals and I project from there. So I kind of I do something a little bit different. Like I'll try to project exactly what I think the score is, and then I'll average that with what Vegas thinks the score is going to be. And sometimes it'll be a big difference. And if it is, that's like one of my favorite things, because then I'm going to go really heavy on a game if I project a team to score way more than Vegas is projecting them to score, because even if I'm wrong, at least it's going to be contrarian, and if I'm right, there's huge upside there. So it starts with the projecting of the game score, because there are certain times, like even right now this week, I'm looking at Atlanta's projection against Carolina. Vegas has them projected at 27.5. They average like 5 points more than that, or maybe even more. So it's like, are they really going to have that much below average of a game with Julio Jones coming back? Most likely, I don't think so. So if you're projecting based on the Vegas total, you're projecting a total of number of touchdowns for Atlanta of way less than their average. So you really can't project them all that high if you go just with Vegas totals, because they tend to be somewhat conservative. And so I might project them at like over 30 points, and that's like an extra half touchdown or more that I have to work with and distribute to the different players and stuff. So that's one way that my projections might end up different than a lot just from the Vegas totals. So I start with that, and then after that, I go through and I project like the number of touchdowns, and then how they're going to be distributed, like defensive touchdowns, rushing and passing touchdowns for the team, and everything is just like to the nearest tenth of a touchdown. So I do that. I distribute those numbers. Then I project out all the defensive stats, just like the sacks, turnovers, and figure out my defense projections for every team. After that, I go through and project each game. So like every position at each game takes me a while to do, and then I've just got my numbers for each player. So with that, I end up putting all those players onto like a different spreadsheet, like all the players that are at least on my radar that I'm considering using. I go through that and I start to try and project what their percent chance of hitting tournament value is and what their percentage chance of busting is. And like for each player that's on my radar, then I go through and just figure out how much exposure I want to each player. Like before even looking at ownership percentages, I figure out how much I would want the player in my lineups, and then I kind of like multiply that by 150, so that I have like my 150 potential lineups and make sure all the salaries end up fitting under the cap. So like if I had these exact percentages of exposure, I could fit all my lineups under the cap comfortably. So once I've done that,
can you elaborate on that part a little bit?
Yeah, so let's see. Let me just pull this up for a second so I have it to look at.
Because mass multi-entering is not something that most people are familiar with, and the people who want to try it don't ever really know where to start.
Yeah, well, let's see what I do. Well, I mean, and I would do this same thing when I was doing like 20 to 25 lineups also. I'd figure out like how many lineups I want each of these players in, and then all I would do is like multiply each player's cost by the number of lineups that I want them in, and then get the total of that for each position. And then say I've got 20 lineups on DraftKings, right? I do 20 times 50, because you get like 50K in each lineup, and so that you've got like 1,000 total to work with in like cost, and I try to do it as if like I try to average it, like my lineups are going to average like 49.85 as far as total lineup costs, so that I leave myself some wiggle room with each one. And so, I start adjusting the number of lineups I'm going to have players in if I'm like over the salary for my total. And then, if I'm like way under for salary, then I know, okay, I can pay up a little more at some of these positions. Like who are my favorite players that are expensive? I could like get a little bit more, get more lineups, something like that.
Okay, so, I got you.
So yeah, just kind of making sure that the guys that I want to get in my lineups like fit properly into the salary cap.
And you do that across a bunch of different lineups. That's interesting.
And yeah, so I just do it for however many lineups I'm going to be running that week, and that way I just know that like when I'm building my lineups, they'll all eventually fit, and I can get the exact exposure percentage that I want for each player. So like, say I'm doing 100 lineups and I want David Johnson in 40 of them. I know that he fits, like when I'm making the lineups, actually, it might not end up at 40 by the end of it. It might just end up at like a couple off from that in either direction, because, just I don't like the lineup with him, or I don't like, or he just like fits really well into a lineup and I could get him a little bit more, just whatever happens while I'm making lineups. But as I'm doing each lineup, I'm like tracking how many times I have each player in a lineup. And so I kind of know, I have like my running total of how many times I have each player in as I'm building each lineup. And in doing that, it kind of lets me know like where to go for my next one. It's like, okay, say I'm supposed to have like the Falcons defense in 10%. I've done 9 lineups and I don't have them in any lineups yet. So they might go in my next one. And that might be like how I start the lineup, is like a certain stack plus the Falcons defense, and then like a couple other core plays, and then I'll fill in with some contrarian plays around that.
That's awesome, man. That's a different way than most people, I would say, even look at the building process. So you have a lot of control over what you're doing. And would you say you would do the same for like a sport like basketball, like the same kind of research process?
I do, somewhat, but it's definitely a lot more condensed. I don't do full projections the same way as I would for football, because I couldn't do that like all in one day for the slate thing, as far as like how much exposure I want to a certain player. So it's almost like I'm kind of doing the work that these optimizers will do too. It's just that I also can stack games the way that I want to. I can have my correlations that I want to, and also make sure that I don't have like too many correlations at the same time. And so for basketball, because of the way that I do things, I'm not going to have like max entries in like probably anything that has a high max. I typically don't go over 30 lineups in a day for basketball, just because I do them all by hand, and that takes time. And you've got to have enough time to like modify them because of the late news. So yeah, basketball, I go a lot lighter in terms of number of lineups, but the process is similar still. I still try to analyze a whole lot.
How long do you reflect on a lineup after you press that submit or save button? Like, do you really try and think about the lineup afterwards, or do you do most of that like rationalization before you actually submit it?
It's pretty much all during while I'm making the lineup. So usually I start each lineup with my stack of like quarterback, wide receiver. It could be like quarterback, wide receiver, and an opposing wide receiver or something like that, for example, or like just a quarterback, wide receiver. And sometimes it's kind of a heavy game stack too. Like it'll be kind of a theme, like maybe it's quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and that team's defense if I think it's going to be a blowout. So whatever my stack is, like that's the first thing I put into the lineup. Second thing is actually the defense normally, which is kind of a weird one to be the next thing, but I just like to do it that way. And then that's like something I could always change at the end too. Defense in there, then I get usually like the tight end after. Then I start looking at like, okay, what salary ranges am I looking at for my running backs and wide receivers for this lineup? And once I get all my players in except for one, then I kind of think like, okay, is the amount of salary left over one that works well? Like, do I like the players that I could get for this salary? If not, then I'll probably change my defense and, either go up or down with that last spot. And then if I like the players that I could get at that salary, then I plug them in and then I'm on to the next lineup.
Yeah, okay, so that's very interesting. So looking at your championship lineup, you had the Falcons D and Tevin Coleman instead of Freeman. So did you went with the Luck and TY stack, but did you also have Jack Doyle in when you with Coleman and Falcons already in there?
I know for sure that I changed that lineup the morning of. So yeah, I remember doing that. One of the big things actually was I didn't have the Falcons defense that morning. So I had two lineups with the Vikings defense and one with the 49ers. And then I started thinking about it and I was like, okay, defense is like the most volatile position of all. Should I really have the same defense in 2 out of 3 lineups? Like sometimes it is the defense that wins tournaments. And so the Falcons defense was one that I liked because of the blowout potential. And it wasn't like my top defense or even really probably even top 3. It was just like I knew that it was kind of a boom or bust one because, I like targeting weak quarterbacks who are likely to get turned over and stuff and throw pick sixes. So I thought Goff fit that description.
For sure, and they scored 2 of them.
Yeah, and the other thing was I think I only had Tevin Coleman in 1 out of 3 lineups at that point, and I wanted him in 2 out of 3, and I wanted Freeman in the other. I just felt really strongly that the Falcons' run game was going to be good that week. I thought that they had a good chance to have a blowout. And I thought that Coleman just like he hadn't broken a big play in a long time, and he's really explosive. I kind of thought he was going to have a long touchdown that game. And so, I was banking more on that. And also, they don't always have Freeman as the goal line back. Like Coleman does get plenty of goal line snaps. It's kind of like a drive-by-drive thing with that team. So, Coleman has a ton of touchdown upside, and he was really cheap. So he was another one that
he ended up scoring a receiving touchdown.
Yeah. So, he was someone I wanted to get in 2 out of 3 lineups. So I put him into that one. I think I originally had Ted Ginn at flex in that lineup, and I took him out. So ended up getting Coleman in there instead. And I liked it because it was the Falcons blowout theme lineup, basically. It had Coleman, Falcons defense, and Taylor Gabriel. So if it was a route, then I had a good shot with that lineup. And, that's fortunately exactly what happened.
So for everyone who doesn't know, at the DraftKings Live final, Gabriel was, I believe, the second highest owned player at around 43%.
Yeah.
And you were sitting in 3rd place, I believe, when he had a 64-yard touchdown. But incidentally, at the same exact time as he had that touchdown, the DraftKings leaderboard froze for about 20 minutes. So what was going through your mind when you saw that touchdown and then not being able to see the updated scores?
I knew I was in first at that point. So, I could do the math at least. So that was cool. One of the things I was hoping was like, I hope it's not down so long that by the time it comes back, I'm not even in first.
Yeah.
Because that would suck. But, man, was it really only 20 minutes too? Because it felt like forever.
Yeah.
It could have easily been.
It was around like 20 so minutes, something like that. But I'm sure it felt like longer.
It felt like an hour to me. But
yeah, man.
Yeah,
I was sitting by the screen the whole time, just like, and everybody was coming up and checking it. I'm like, not yet, because like I was updating things live time, so I wanted to be there like as soon as it came back.
Yeah.
And you jumped up, and something funny about the tournament that I actually haven't even told anybody yet. But at one point in the last drive, first of all, we have the Jeff Fisher Rams down like 41-7 with Gurley still in the game. And I took a picture of you right as they were on the goal line. And instead of Gurley putting it in, Jared Goff put it in. And you went nuts. You raised your hand in the air and stuff. And I took a picture and posted it. And then I saw you see it like with one of the DraftKings guys, and you look over at me and you're like, too soon. And I was like, oh no. I was like, did I just jinx him? I was like, oh, I hope I didn't jinx him. And then the next drive, like Gurley's still in the game. So tell me what was going on in your mind when you're up like 2 points, less than 2 minutes, and Gurley's still in the game, down like 4 touchdowns.
Yeah, it was crazy. I had a feeling he would still be in the game then too. Like, it was a crazy sweat because they had, Benny Cunningham wasn't active, and he's normally the number 2 running back. In that game, Malcolm Brown was their number 2. He had like 1 carry and he lost a fumble on it. So I'm like, all right, they're not even putting him back in. Like, you get 1 carry and you lose a fumble, you're done. So like, I knew they were going to have Gurley in. What I was really hoping is they wouldn't throw him the ball, because then, you get the point just for the catch. All he needs is like 2 catches, and then the guy could easily pass me, or like a catch for 20 yards and I'm done. So, I shouldn't say done, because $1 million was second place. So it's not like that would have been the worst thing in the world, but still, you want to hold on to first, of course, in that situation. And so, yeah, they handed it to Gurley up the middle. I was happy it was up the middle at least, because, it didn't seem like they were really trying that hard to break a big run. But it was still tough to watch, just knowing that, like, if he breaks a tackle and gets in the open field, that, I could stand to move down. And, of course, if he, like, broke an 80-yard touchdown or something, then I'd probably move down multiple spots. And
what's crazy is, like, I think at one point, like, I think when they got the ball back, Atlanta scored like another touchdown, or like their defense, but it got called back. And so, you remember that?
Yeah, I think or I think it might have been like incomplete in the first place, and it like looked like a touchdown, but they, you know, they had already blown the whistle and everything. And
Yeah, but like it looked like game was over, like throw the trophy at him, and then like they have the ball again and they're still running with Gurley. 7-yard
yeah,
carry, 5-yard carry. And then we just see they just run the clock out the rest of the game. And like I there was such a sigh of relief just in the whole room in general of like, all right, he got it. You know?
I think part of it was like, I think the DK people were thinking the same thing too, because the guy who was in second place had a proxy there. Like he wasn't actually at the tournament. So they're kind of like, oh shoot, I hope that tournament, like, you know, like it doesn't look as good for the site when the person who wins isn't there. Because I mean, I don't know how you miss those events too, because it's like they're so fun to be at, but you know,
sure.
it's such a cool thing.
Who has the chance at $2 million? It doesn't even show up.
But you know, I mean, I guess only if there's something major. I heard it was something like a wedding. So, you know, if it's like a wedding of a close friend, okay, but I don't know. I'd be saying like months in advance, be like, do not plan your wedding for a Sunday, like during championships. I'm not going.
I mean, he came away with $1 million, so I'm sure he wasn't too upset.
No, yeah. I mean, yeah. So it was a crazy situation, and I'm just glad that it turned out the way it did. It was perfect.
It was wild, man. It was a wild experience. How did you feel about transitioning into becoming a pro player and like actually leaving, you know, a career or a job and like transitioning full time?
Well, it happened after kind of a string of good wins in NBA, and that was kind of what sealed it for me, because it was like I just kind of thought of the first NFL win as like, all right, let's pretend that that didn't happen, and if I can prove myself in NBA, then I could go full time, you know. And you know, over the first few months that I was playing NBA only, I had like probably 4 or 5 different days where I made more in a day than I would in like 3 months of training, you know. And it was just like, all right, I'm spending all this time at work here. I could just be spending more time doing this, like for basketball, and making more money probably, you know. So it actually was mostly financial, you know. And also my schedule is kind of all over the place with training, because that's just how it is, you know. Like I'll be early in the morning, late at night, kind of randomly throughout the day. So I'd come and go quite a bit. And I was working real close to where I live, so it was fine. I was like literally walking distance, which is awesome. So it was a great situation for that job too. It's just, you know, when you have an opportunity to make good money doing something that you just kind of feel like you're meant to do at a certain point, you know, like it's just starting to look that way. And like all the stuff I used to love as a kid, and how I would spend so much time like analyzing stats as a kid, watching games, playing the sports, like it just felt right, you know. And so like I never regretted leaving training, even though I liked it and stuff. It would be, you know, it was still a good job. It was never something like I felt like I escaped.
Right, you weren't stuck in a anyway. You already weren't, you know, on that traditional 9 to 5, you know, commute to the city every day kind of stuff.
It was like I already had a job where I was walking to work. I had a cool schedule. I would have some time where I was at home during the day occasionally, or like most of the time I'd have, you know, at least a couple hours of chunk of time during the day. And so it was a really good situation already. It was just going from a good situation to like a dream situation. So, you know, that's what it feels like as far as doing this.
Do you approach basketball the same way that you do with football?
What's that? How do you mean?
Like in terms of like lineup construction and your research process of like analyzing the game and the total and trying to figure out what the points are going to be, and again putting that against Vegas to analyze like the players you may use and things like that. Like,
yeah, it is.
Do you have time for a research process for NBA real quick?
Yeah, man, I gotta like remember. I really have not even started NBA this year. I've kind of only been doing football lately. I've played I think like 5 NBA slates all season,
Oh, okay,
and
okay.
but yeah, I would like I'd jot down like the matchups and what the figure out what the Vegas totals are. You know, my projection will usually be really close to what the Vegas totals are, but um, you know, from there I figure out depending on how many lineups I'm doing that day, because like I would say it varies quite a bit with NBA based on tournaments are that day. You know, um, I would figure out how many lineups I have going that day, which players I'm the highest on, and which ones I think will be low enough owned to where I have like some upside in each lineup. Um, Sometimes I'll do some sort of a stack, like if I think it's going to be a shootout game. If it's going to be a blowout, I might stack it a certain way, or if like a team is really short-handed, but I think they can still keep it competitive, I might stack that team a decent amount. So, those are the correlations I'll look for a lot. But other than that, I kind of look for, like, I'll have NBA League Pass and I try to watch a good amount of games when I'm playing NBA. And I try to look for players who either have performed well in limited duty and kind of store that in my memory for if they get an opportunity for an expanded role later in the season. And, just look for players that seem like they're on a roll or something, whether the stats show it or not. If they just really look good, kind of the same way with NFL, then those are guys that I want to try to get into lineups.
So a lot of what you're doing is looking kind of ahead of time at what you want to be doing in the future. Like if this happens, I'll be able to take advantage of it. And I saw this player performing well in a blowout, but if the game stays competitive and he gets a certain amount of minutes or a certain amount of touches in football, then I think he'll overperform his salary and ownership percentage.
Exactly, yeah. And also with NBA, you want to see how players do with certain matchups too. And for me, it's always the rookies that I have to analyze the most. I always feel like I have to catch up on those guys because I don't really follow college basketball. So I got to see how the rookies play, like who they match up against well. And, for certain players who've been in the league for a while, it's like say DeMarcus Cousins. He's one I feel like I typically have a good feel for because you put DeMarcus Cousins against kind of like a thin center, he's going off. Like he just is. He'll bully him all game, And likewise, he has big home road splits. He has big splits based on like numbers of days rest too. So like he's one of those guys that's volatile but predictable at the same time. And so he's one of my favorite players for DFS. And so I try to look for that in some other players too, guys that have like crazy splits in some way. Batum last year had an unbelievable home road split. It's like freaking 12 points different.
It feels like the Charlotte players in general are like that for whatever reason. Like Kemba does as well.
Yeah, he has some splits too. And so, anyway, yeah. I just look for, things like that aren't necessarily accounted for in the price. And if I can find that type of thing, then that's something I really use heavily.
All right, man. Well, I really appreciate you answering all the questions, and I really hope that people got a lot out of this, and it was great information on game selection, lineup building, the way you approach the sports in general, and I just wanted to say congratulations again, and thank you so much for coming on. And I would really love to do this in the future. If we can make some time together for this, I think it would be great to do again.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for having me. And yeah, we'll definitely
No problem. Absolutely, man. Well, pleasure meeting you. Congratulations once again. You could find Scott at Twitter, RG_escot4. And you could find me on Twitter at xBenJamminx, dailyrotosharks.com. Thank you very much, guys. Have a good day.